For 17-year-old Linda Davis, the morning shift at Rosewood Cafe was supposed to be just another day of serving coffee and clearing tables. She moved through the bustling restaurant with practiced efficiency, her hands dancing in silent conversation with her deaf younger brother when he stopped by for breakfast. But when a sleek black sedan pulled up outside and discharged its elegantly dressed passengers, Linda had no idea she was about to become the center of a story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about privilege, compassion, and the invisible barriers that divide us. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rosewood Cafe, casting long golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floors. It was the kind of upscale establishment that attracted Silicon Valley executives and tech entrepreneurs, with its exposed brick walls adorned with local art and the gentle hum of expensive espresso machines providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the breakfast rush. Linda Davis had been working there for 8 months, saving every penny for her younger brother's college fund, while juggling her own community college classes. With her dark hair pulled back in the regulation ponytail, Linda moved between tables with a quiet grace that belied the exhaustion she felt from working double shifts. The cafe's clientele rarely noticed her beyond ensuring their oat milk lattes arrived at the perfect temperature. She was invisible in the ways service workers often are, a necessary but unremarkable part of their morning routine. The bell above the entrance chimed with its familiar brass tone as 3 figures entered the cafe. Linda glanced up from wiping down table 6 and felt her breath catch slightly. The woman leading the group was striking in that effortless way that money could buy. Her silver hair was styled in an immaculate bob, and her navy blazer probably cost more than Linda made in 3 months. Behind her walked a man in a charcoal suit that screamed corporate 50s, his phone pressed to his ear as he conducted what sounded like an important business call. But it was the third member of their party that made Linda's heart skip a beat. A young man who appeared to be in his early 20s with sandy brown hair and intelligent green eyes moved with the confident stride of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His casual designer clothes and expensive watch marked him as someone from a completely different universe than hers. This was clearly old money, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it had been there for generations. The hostess, Jennifer, immediately sprang into action with the kind of enthusiastic attention reserved for the cafe's most important customers. She guided them to the corner booth that offered the best view of the tree-lined street outside, the same table that was perpetually reserved for VIP guests. Linda watched as Jennifer fussed over them, adjusting the already perfect place settings and ensuring their water glasses were filled to the exact right level. Linda's manager, Derek, appeared at her elbow with the practiced smile he reserved for high-stakes situations. His voice was low and urgent as he briefed her on the approaching challenge. These are the Ashfords. Elizabeth Ashford owns half the commercial real estate in the Bay Area. Her son Richard runs their family foundation. The young man is Elizabeth's grandson, Marcus. They come in maybe once a month and they tip extremely well, so make sure everything is perfect. Linda nodded, straightening her black apron and checking that her name tag was properly positioned. She had served wealthy customers before, but there was something about this particular family that radiated a level of influence she had rarely encountered. The way other diners glanced in their direction with a mixture of curiosity and deference told her everything she needed to know about their status in this community. As she approached their table with menus and her most professional smile, Linda caught fragments of their conversation. Elizabeth was discussing some sort of charity gala while Richard reviewed documents on his tablet, occasionally interjecting with comments about donor cultivation strategies and corporate sponsorships. Marcus sat quietly, his attention focused on something outside the window, seemingly disconnected from the business discussions surrounding him. "Good morning," Linda said, her voice clear and friendly. "Welcome to Rosewood Cafe. My name is Linda and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with some coffee, or would you prefer to hear about our breakfast specials?" Elizabeth looked up with the polite but distant smile that Linda had learned to recognize in wealthy customers. "Coffee would be wonderful, dear. Something dark and strong." Richard barely glanced up from his tablet as he requested an espresso, his phone call apparently more important than acknowledging her presence. But when Linda turned to Marcus, something unexpected happened. Instead of speaking, she found herself naturally transitioning into American Sign Language, her hands moving in fluid gestures as she asked what he would like to drink. It was an unconscious response, the same way she communicated with her brother Danny every morning when he stopped by before his classes at the community college. Her hands formed the signs for coffee, tea, and juice, while her face maintained the questioning expression that was integral to ASL communication. Marcus stared at her with complete shock, his green eyes widening as he processed what had just happened. The casual conversation between his grandmother and father came to an abrupt halt as they both turned to look at their grandson, then at Linda, trying to understand the sudden tension that had filled the space around their table. "You know sign language," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question, but rather a statement, filled with wonder and disbelief. Linda nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious about her automatic response. She hadn't meant to assume anything about him, but something in his posture and the way he had been observing rather than participating in the conversation had triggered her instinct to communicate in the used with language she, Danny. "I'm sorry if I made an incorrect assumption," she said aloud while also signing her words. "I have a deaf brother, and sometimes I just naturally switch to ASL." The change in Marcus was immediate and profound. The distant, almost bored expression that had characterized his demeanor since entering the cafe vanished, replaced by something Linda could only describe as raw emotion. His hands began to move in response, signing with the fluid precision that spoke of years of practice and natural fluency. "No one has signed to me in a restaurant before," he communicated through his gestures, his face animated in a way that transformed his entire appearance. "Most people just assume I can read lips, or they talk louder as if volume will somehow make me hear better." Linda felt a rush of understanding and connection that caught her completely off guard. She had witnessed this exact frustration in Danny countless times, the exhaustion that came from constantly having to navigate a world that wasn't designed for deaf individuals. The relief that washed over Marcus's features as he realized he could communicate naturally was something she recognized intimately. Elizabeth and Richard watched this silent exchange with expressions that revealed their own shock and confusion. It was clear that Marcus's deafness was not something they typically discussed openly, and Linda's immediate recognition and acceptance of his preferred communication method had created a moment of vulnerability that none of them had expected. "What would you like to drink?" Linda asked again in ASL, her movements deliberate and clear. "We have excellent coffee, fresh squeezed orange juice, and our barista makes an amazing chai latte." Marcus's smile was radiant as he responded, his hands moving with obvious joy at being able to communicate so effortlessly. "Coffee sounds perfect. Black, no sugar. And thank you for not making me feel like I need to apologize for how I communicate." The interaction had created an invisible bubble around their table, a pocket of understanding and connection that seemed to exist outside the normal dynamics of customer and server. Linda found herself genuinely smiling for the first time that morning, not the practiced professional smile she wore for tips, but the genuine expression of someone who had just made an unexpected connection. Elizabeth cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the broader table dynamic. Her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been concern as she addressed Linda directly. "How long have you been fluent in sign language?" "Dear, about 12 years, Linda replied, both verbally and in sign, ensuring Marcus remained included in the conversation. "My brother Danny was born deaf, so our whole family learned ASL when he was little. It's just our normal way of communicating at home." Richard finally looked up from his tablet, his business call apparently concluded. His gaze moved between Linda and his son with an expression that suggested he was processing something significant. He had spent years watching Marcus navigate social situations with varying degrees of success and frustration, and this was the first time he had seen his son look genuinely comfortable and engaged with someone outside their immediate family. The morning rush continued around them, but their table had become an island of connection in the busy cafe. Linda took their breakfast orders, switching seamlessly between verbal communication with Elizabeth and Richard and sign language with Marcus, who seemed to grow more animated with each exchange. He asked about the local sourcing of their ingredients, complimented the cafe's accessible design, and even made a joke about the pretentious names of some menu items. As Linda headed back to the kitchen to place their orders, she caught Derek watching the interaction with obvious fascination. Other servers had noticed too, their curiosity evident as they observed this unprecedented level of engagement between a customer and their typically reserved colleague. The Ashford family's breakfast order was more complex than usual, not because of dietary restrictions or special requests, but because of the extended conversation that had developed around their table. Linda found herself returning multiple times to clarify details, each visit extending the sign language exchange with Marcus and drawing increasingly interested looks from Elizabeth and Richard. What Linda didn't know was that this simple morning interaction was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the invisible lines that separate different worlds, and that Marcus Ashford carried secrets that would soon transform both their lives in ways neither could possibly imagine. When Linda returned with their breakfast orders, she noticed Marcus had positioned himself differently at the table, angling his body so he could see both his family members and maintain clear sightlines for signing. It was a subtle accommodation that spoke volumes about his experience navigating conversations in mixed communication environments. She set down Elizabeth's avocado toast with precision, placed Richard's eggs Benedict exactly where he preferred it, and delivered Marcus's order of steel-cut oats with fresh berries directly into his line of sight. "Thank you," Marcus signed, his movements incorporating a level of warmth that went beyond mere politeness. "This is the first time I've been able to order exactly what I wanted without having to write it down or point at a menu." Linda's heart tightened at the casual way he mentioned what should have been a basic dignity. She had watched Danny face similar challenges countless times, the small humiliations that accumulated over years of being misunderstood or ignored. The way Marcus's shoulders had relaxed since their first exchange told her everything about the constant tension he normally carried. Elizabeth cut into her toast with surgical precision, but her attention remained focused on the interaction between her grandson and their server. There was something in her expression that suggested she was seeing Marcus differently than she had in years, perhaps recognizing aspects of his experience that had been invisible to her despite their close relationship. "Linda," Richard said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to directing conversations, "my son tells me you've been working here for several months. Are you a student as well?" "Yes, sir," Linda replied, while simultaneously signing for Marcus's benefit. "I'm taking business classes at Peninsula Community College, part-time, so I can work enough hours to help support my family." The mention of community college seemed to register with Elizabeth, whose perfectly manicured eyebrows rose slightly. Not many of the servers at Rosewood Cafe were pursuing higher education. Most were aspiring actors or artists using the job as temporary income while chasing more glamorous dreams. Linda's practical approach to building her future through education clearly intrigued the older woman. "What kind of business are you hoping to get into?" Marcus asked, his signs fluid and natural. His genuine interest was evident not just in his hand movements, but in the way he leaned forward slightly, giving Linda his complete attention. Linda felt a flutter of nervousness. Discussing her dreams with customers wasn't typically part of her job description, but something about Marcus's sincere curiosity made her want to share honestly. "I want to open a consulting firm that helps businesses become more accessible for deaf and disabled customers. Too many places don't realize how much potential business they're losing by not making simple accommodations." The impact of her words was immediate and visible. Elizabeth's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Richard's phone screen went dark as he set it aside, and Marcus's entire face lit up with an expression of genuine excitement and recognition. This wasn't just career ambition Linda was describing, it was a mission born from personal experience and deep understanding. "That's brilliant," Marcus signed, his movements quick with enthusiasm. Most businesses have no idea how to interact with deaf customers. I've walked out of restaurants because the staff acted like I was some kind of burden they had to tolerate. Linda nodded vigorously, her own passion for the subject overriding her usual professional reserve. Exactly. And it's not just about sign language. Simple. Things like making sure deaf customers can see the server's face when they're speaking, having written menus available, training staff not to get frustrated when someone needs extra time to communicate. Basic human dignity shouldn't be revolutionary. Elizabeth set down her fork entirely, her full attention now focused on Linda with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly intimidating. "Young lady," she said, her voice carrying decades of business experience, "what you're describing isn't just a nice idea. It's a massive market opportunity that most companies are completely ignoring." Richard pulled out his phone again, but this time to take notes rather than field calls. His businessman's mind was clearly processing the commercial implications of Linda's vision. The Americans with Disabilities Act compliance market alone is worth billions, he said, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. But most consulting firms approach it as a legal requirement rather than a customer service enhancement. Linda felt a surge of validation that was almost overwhelming. She had spent countless hours researching this exact market gap, writing business plan drafts late at night after her shifts, dreaming of a future where her brother Danny wouldn't have to face daily indignities simply for existing in public spaces. Having successful business people take her ideas seriously felt surreal. "How far along are you with developing this concept?" Elizabeth asked, her tone suggesting this was no longer casual breakfast conversation, but something approaching a business inquiry. "I have a detailed business plan," Linda replied, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "Market research, potential client profiles, service offerings, financial projections. I've been working on it for 2 years, refining it based on real-world experiences I've observed with my brother." Marcus had been following the conversation through Linda's signing, but now he addressed his grandmother directly in spoken words, his voice carrying an urgency Linda hadn't heard before. "Grandmother, this is exactly what our foundation should be supporting. Real solutions from people who understand the problems firsthand. The Ashford Foundation." Linda's mind immediately connected the dots. She had researched various grant opportunities for disability advocacy organizations and social entrepreneurs. The Ashford Foundation was legendary in philanthropic circles, known for identifying innovative approaches to social challenges and providing both funding and mentorship to promising ventures. Elizabeth and Richard exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes without words. Linda recognized the expression from watching her parents make important family decisions, that moment when multiple generations of experience converged on a shared understanding. "Linda," Elizabeth said, her voice taking on a formal quality that suggested significant things were about to be discussed, "would you be interested in presenting your business plan to our foundation's review board? We're always looking for entrepreneurs who combine personal passion with market viability." The words hit Linda like a physical force. She had dreamed of this exact opportunity, had practiced presentation pitches in her bathroom mirror, had imagined what it would feel like to have serious investors consider her work. But she had never expected it to emerge from a routine breakfast service at her restaurant job. Marcus was signing something to her, his movements so rapid with excitement that she had to ask him to slow down. He repeated his message more deliberately. "This could change everything, not just for your business, but for people like me who are tired of being invisible." Linda's hands trembled slightly as she signed back to him. She was acutely aware that every other table in the restaurant was now watching their interaction with undisguised curiosity. The normally reserved Ashford family was engaged in animated discussion with their server, and the unusual dynamic was drawing attention from both staff and other customers. Derek appeared at her elbow with the coffee pot, ostensibly to refill their cups, but clearly motivated by curiosity about the extended conversation. His professional smile was stretched tight with the strain of wanting to know what was happening at table 12 without being able to directly ask. "I would be honored to present to your board," Linda managed to say, her voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "When would be appropriate?" Richard consulted his phone calendar with the efficiency of someone who managed complex schedules as naturally as breathing. "We have a quarterly review meeting next Friday afternoon. If you're serious about this opportunity, I can arrange for you to have a 30-minute presentation slot." The timeline was both thrilling and terrifying. 1 week to prepare the presentation that could determine the trajectory of her entire future. Linda's mind immediately began racing through everything she would need to organize, refine, and perfect in 7 days while maintaining her work schedule and class commitments. Marcus reached across the table and gently touched her arm to get her attention, then signed a question that made her heart skip. "Would you like help preparing? I know how foundation presentations work, and I understand the accessibility market better than most people." The offer was unexpected and incredibly generous. Linda looked into his green eyes and saw genuine enthusiasm mixed with something deeper, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their obvious differences in background and circumstances. Elizabeth was watching this exchange with growing fascination. Her grandson, who typically remained politely disengaged during family business discussions, was more animated and involved than she had seen him in years. The transformation was remarkable and somewhat puzzling. "Linda," she said, drawing attention back to the broader conversation, "I'm curious about something. How did you know to communicate with Marcus in sign language? He doesn't typically advertise his deafness, and most people don't immediately recognize it." The question hung in the air with unexpected weight. Linda realized that her instinctive response to Marcus had revealed something about her observational skills and intuitive understanding that went beyond mere familiarity with ASL. She had recognized something in his body language and behavior that most people missed entirely. "I spend a lot of time watching how people communicate," Linda replied thoughtfully. "My brother taught me to notice the subtle ways people position themselves, how they track conversations, where they focus their attention. Marcus was observing everything very carefully but not participating verbally. It reminded me of how Danny behaves in groups where he's the only deaf person." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That's exactly the kind of insight that would be valuable in accessibility consulting. Most people who aren't directly affected by these issues simply don't see the patterns. The breakfast rush was beginning to wind down around them, but their table had become an island of intense conversation that showed no signs of concluding. Linda was acutely aware that she had other customers waiting and tables that needed attention, but she was also reluctant to break the spell of this unexpected opportunity. Marcus seemed to sense her divided attention and signed a question about her work schedule. When Linda explained that she typically worked double shifts on weekends to maximize her income, his expression grew thoughtful. "What if we met tomorrow evening to work on your presentation?" he suggested through sign language. "I could come here after you finish your shift, and we could use the quiet evening hours to refine your business plan." The proposal was both practical and slightly overwhelming. The idea of spending extended time with Marcus Ashford, working collaboratively on something that mattered deeply to both of them, represented a level of personal and professional opportunity that Linda had never imagined possible. Elizabeth stood up from the table, her movement signaling that their breakfast meeting was drawing to a close. She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card with the elegant simplicity that marked truly expensive design. "Linda," she said, handing over the card, "please call my assistant Monday morning to confirm the details for Friday's presentation. And I want you to know that regardless of the Foundation's ultimate decision, I'm impressed by your vision and determination." Richard left a tip that was more than Linda typically made in an entire shift, but the money felt secondary to the connections that had been forged over the past hour. As the family prepared to leave, Marcus lingered at the table for a moment, signing a private message. "To Linda, thank you for seeing me as a whole person instead of just someone who can't hear. That means more than you know." Linda's eyes filled with unexpected tears as she signed back. "Thank you for showing me that my dreams might actually be possible." As the Ashford family walked toward the exit, Linda stood beside their now empty table, holding Elizabeth's business card and feeling as though the entire trajectory of her life had shifted in the span of a single breakfast service. The cafe had returned to its normal rhythm by the time Linda finished clearing table 12, but the echo of the morning's extraordinary encounter seemed to vibrate through every mundane task that followed. She moved mechanically through her remaining tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, but her mind kept returning to the weight of Elizabeth Ashford's business card in her apron pocket, and the memory of Marcus's radiant smile when he realized she could communicate with him naturally. Derek cornered her during the brief lull between breakfast and lunch service, his curiosity barely contained behind his professional demeanor. His eyes darted around the dining room before he leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice to avoid attracting attention from the remaining customers. "What exactly happened over there?" he asked, his tone mixing genuine interest with the slight edge of a manager who needed to understand any unusual customer interactions. "I've never seen the Ashfords stay that long, or engage so intensely with staff." Elizabeth looked like she was conducting a business meeting. Linda carefully wiped down the espresso machine while choosing her words with deliberate care. She knew that workplace gossip traveled fast in restaurant environments, and she didn't want to jinx the incredible opportunity that had just presented itself by discussing it prematurely. "They were interested in my business plan," she said simply, her voice steady despite the excitement still coursing through her system. "The foundation might want to hear a presentation about accessibility consulting." Derek's eyebrows shot up toward his receding hairline, and Linda could practically see the calculations running through his mind. He understood enough about the local business landscape to recognize the significance of Ashford Foundation interest, and his expression shifted from casual curiosity to something approaching awe. "Linda, that's incredible," he said, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm mixed with professional pride. "Having one of our servers get that kind of recognition reflects well on the entire establishment. If you need any time off to prepare or present, just let me know. We'll make it work." The support was unexpected and touching. Linda had grown accustomed to viewing her restaurant job as simply a means to an end, a way to pay bills while pursuing her real ambitions. The idea that her colleagues might actually invest in her success felt foreign but welcome. The lunch crowd began filtering in around 11:30, bringing with it the familiar chaos of orders and service that typically consumed Linda's attention completely. But today, even while taking orders for turkey clubs and Caesar salads, part of her mind remained focused on the presentation she would need to craft over the next 7 days. During her brief break between lunch and dinner service, Linda found herself sitting in the staff room with her laptop open, staring at the business plan she had refined countless times over the past 2 years. What had seemed comprehensive and polished just that morning now felt inadequate for the stakes she was facing. The Ashford Foundation represented the kind of opportunity that could transform her carefully constructed 5-year plan into immediate reality. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and Linda felt her heart rate spike when she read the sender's identification. Marcus Ashford had somehow obtained her contact information, though she realized Derek must have provided it when asked. The message was brief, but warm. "Hi Linda, this is Marcus from breakfast this morning. I wanted to confirm our meeting tomorrow evening if you're still interested in collaboration on your presentation. I have some insights about foundation expectations that might be helpful. Would 7 o'clock work after your shift ends?" Linda stared at the screen for several moments before responding, trying to process the surreal reality that she was now exchanging text messages with someone from one of the Bay Area's most prominent families. The casual tone of his message helped ease some of her nervousness, but she remained acutely aware of the vast differences in their backgrounds and circumstances. 7 o'clock sounds perfect, she typed back. "Should we meet here at the cafe, or would you prefer somewhere else?" His response came quickly. "The cafe works well, it's quiet in the evenings and you'll be comfortable in familiar surroundings. Plus their internet connection is excellent for pulling up research materials." The practical consideration in his message reminded Linda that despite his wealth and privilege, Marcus understood the logistics of working on projects in public spaces. It was a small detail, but it suggested a level of awareness about real-world constraints that she hadn't expected from someone in his position. The remainder of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks punctuated by moments of almost paralyzing excitement about the opportunities ahead. Linda found herself observing the cafe's accessibility features with new eyes, noting the wide doorways that accommodated wheelchairs, the good lighting that helped with lip reading, and the relatively low ambient noise levels that made conversation easier for people with hearing difficulties. When Danny stopped by during the dinner rush for his usual after-class coffee, Linda could barely contain her news. Her younger brother slid into a corner booth, his backpack heavy with textbooks from his engineering courses at the community college. His eyes immediately picked up on her elevated energy levels, and he signed a question about her obvious excitement. "Something incredible happened this morning," Linda signed, her movements quick with enthusiasm. "A customer recognized that I was signing, and it turns out he's deaf too. His family runs a major foundation, and they want to hear my business plan presentation." Danny's eyes widened with genuine amazement and pride. His hands moved in rapid response, asking for details about the encounter and the presentation opportunity. Linda found herself relaying the entire morning's events through sign language, watching her brother's expression shift from surprise to excitement to something approaching awe. "This could change everything for people like us." Danny signed, his movements carrying the weight of years spent navigating an inaccessible world. "If you can help businesses understand what we need, it won't just be about compliance anymore. It'll be about genuine inclusion." The conversation with Danny helped crystallize something important for Linda about her upcoming presentation. This wasn't just about securing funding for a business venture. It was about representing an entire community of people whose needs had been systematically overlooked by mainstream society. The responsibility was both inspiring and slightly intimidating. That evening, after her shift ended and the cafe had been cleaned and prepared for the next day, Linda sat alone at table 12 with her laptop and notebook spread across the surface. The table where the Ashford family had sat that morning now served as her private office, illuminated by the warm pendant lights that created intimate pools of brightness in the otherwise darkened restaurant. She opened her business plan document and began reading through it with fresh eyes, trying to see it from the perspective of foundation board members who would be evaluating its potential for social impact and financial viability. The sections on market analysis and competitive landscape felt solid, but she realized she needed to strengthen the portions dealing with measurable outcomes and scalability. Linda's phone buzzed again with another message from Marcus. "I've been thinking about your presentation and realized I should mention that my grandmother tends to focus heavily on implementation timelines and concrete success metrics. She's less interested in theoretical benefits than in specific measurable improvements you can deliver." The insight was invaluable and immediately actionable. Linda opened a new document and began outlining specific case studies she could present, drawing from her experiences with Danny and other deaf community members she knew. She started crafting scenarios that demonstrated exactly how her consulting services would translate into improved customer experiences and increased business revenue. As she worked, Linda found herself thinking about Marcus's transformation during their morning interaction. The contrast between his initial detachment and his subsequent engagement had been remarkable to witness. She wondered how many other deaf individuals went through their daily lives feeling invisible or misunderstood, and how many businesses were missing opportunities to connect with customers simply because they lacked basic awareness about communication accessibility. The cafe's evening quiet was broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the street outside and the occasional sound of the building's heating system cycling on. Linda felt a deep sense of purpose settling over her as she worked, a recognition that this opportunity represented more than just personal advancement. It was a chance to advocate for systemic change that could improve life for countless people who shared her brother's experiences. By 10 o'clock, Linda had restructured significant portions of her business plan and created a rough outline for her presentation slides. The work felt different than her previous iterations had, infused with new urgency and clarity about her target audience. She was no longer writing for hypothetical investors, but for specific people who had expressed genuine interest in her vision. As she packed up her materials and prepared to lock up the cafe, Linda caught her reflection in the darkened windows that faced the street. The young woman looking back at her seemed somehow different than the server who had started her shift that morning. There was a new confidence in her posture, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. The walk home through the quiet residential streets gave Linda time to process the day's extraordinary developments. She passed houses where families were settling in for the evening, their windows glowing with warm light, and found herself imagining a future where her work might make those homes more welcoming to visitors like Danny, where businesses throughout the community would naturally accommodate diverse communication needs. Her small apartment felt both familiar and somehow transformed when she finally arrived home. The modest space she shared with Danny suddenly seemed like a launching pad, rather than a limitation. Linda set her laptop on their small dining table and began making notes about everything she wanted to discuss with Marcus the following evening. Danny emerged from his bedroom as she was organizing her materials, signing a question about her continued excitement levels. Linda quickly filled him in on her evening's progress and Marcus's helpful insights about foundation expectations. "I want to help with your presentation," Danny signed, his expression serious and determined. "This isn't just about your business anymore. It's about proving that deaf people can be valuable customers and contributors when businesses make the effort to include us properly." The offer touched Linda deeply, but it also highlighted something she needed to address in her presentation. Her consulting firm wouldn't just be about implementing accessibility measures, it would be about changing fundamental attitudes and assumptions about disability and capability. Danny's involvement would demonstrate that deaf individuals were partners in creating solutions, not just passive beneficiaries of accommodations. As Linda prepared for bed that night, she found herself alternating between excitement about the opportunities ahead and nervousness about meeting the expectations that came with them. The Ashford Foundation presentation represented a pivotal moment that could determine whether her carefully nurtured dreams remained fantasies or became reality. She fell asleep that night with Elizabeth Ashford's business card on her nightstand and Marcus's text messages saved on her phone, tangible reminders that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities emerge from the most ordinary moments. Tomorrow evening would bring the next chapter of this unexpected story, and Linda was determined to be ready for whatever possibilities it might reveal. The following evening arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made the Bay Area famous, the setting sun painting the cafe's windows in shades of amber and gold. Linda had spent the day in a state of controlled anticipation, moving through her regular shift with mechanical precision while her mind remained focused on the evening ahead. Every interaction with customers felt like practice for the presentation that could change everything. Each moment of communication refined and purposeful. At exactly 7 o'clock, the familiar chime of the entrance bell announced Marcus's arrival. He looked different in the evening light, more relaxed in dark jeans and a forest green sweater that brought out the color of his eyes. Gone was the formal distance that had characterized his initial demeanor at breakfast. In its place was an easy confidence that spoke of genuine enthusiasm for the work ahead. Linda had claimed the same corner booth where his family had sat that morning, transforming it into an impromptu office space with her laptop, notebooks, and a stack of printed research materials. The cafe's evening atmosphere was markedly different from its morning energy, quieter and more intimate with only a handful of customers scattered throughout the dining room. "Thank you for meeting me," Linda signed as Marcus approached, her movements carrying both gratitude and barely contained nervous energy. "I've been thinking about your grandmother's preferences all day and I think I know how to structure this presentation." Marcus slid into the booth across from her, his attention immediately focusing on the materials spread across the table. His eyes scanned her notes with the kind of systematic thoroughness that suggested genuine business acumen, not just polite interest from someone with too much time. "And money. Show me what you've got," he signed, his expression encouraging but serious. "I've sat through dozens of foundation presentations, and I know exactly what captures their attention versus what makes their eyes glaze over." Linda opened her laptop and turned the screen so they could both see it clearly. The presentation outline she had crafted looked different in Marcus's presence, more real somehow, as if having an audience transformed her ideas from abstract concepts into concrete proposals ready for implementation. I want to start with a story, she explained, her hands moving in fluid gestures while her voice provided additional context. Not statistics or market analysis, but a real situation that demonstrates the problem and the solution. Something that makes the board members understand this isn't just about compliance, it's about human dignity and lost revenue. Marcus nodded approvingly, his own hands moving in response. Exactly right. My grandmother always says that data tells you what happened, but stories tell you why it matters. What story are you planning to use? Linda pulled up a document on her screen that contained several potential scenarios she had been developing. The first involved Danny's experience trying to order food at a popular restaurant where the server had grown visibly frustrated with the time it took to communicate, ultimately resulting in a simplified order, and Danny leaving, feeling embarrassed and unwelcome. The second scenario focused on a local business that had lost a significant catering contract because they couldn't accommodate a deaf executive's communication needs during a planning meeting. The third described a retail store that had inadvertently excluded deaf customers by relying entirely on audio announcements for sales and promotions. These are all real situations, Linda signed, her expression growing more passionate as she described each scenario. But here's what makes them powerful for your foundation. In every case, simple modifications would have prevented the problem and actually improved the experience for everyone, not just deaf customers. Marcus leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her presentation. His business training was evident in the questions he began asking about implementation costs, training requirements, and measurable outcomes. But there was something deeper in his engagement. A personal investment that went beyond professional curiosity. You're approaching this exactly right. He signed after reviewing several of her proposed solutions. Most accessibility consultants focus on legal requirements and compliance checklists. You're talking about customer experience and revenue generation. That's the language that gets foundation boards excited about funding. Linda felt a surge of validation overwhelming. She that was almost had spent countless hours researching successful social enterprises and studying foundation funding patterns, but having someone with insider knowledge confirm her strategic approach was invaluable. As they worked through the presentation structure, Linda began to understand why Marcus had offered to help. His questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of both business strategy and accessibility challenges that could only come from lived experience. He wasn't just the wealthy grandson offering charitable assistance, he was a knowledgeable collaborator with genuine expertise. The cafe around them gradually emptied as the evening progressed, leaving them in an increasingly private bubble of focused collaboration. Derek had offered to stay late to lock up, recognizing the importance of Linda's meeting without needing detailed explanations. The ambient lighting and quiet atmosphere created an almost magical environment for the kind of intensive creative work they were doing. Marcus pulled out his own laptop and began showing Linda examples of successful foundation presentations from previous years. His access to internal materials was invaluable, providing insights into the specific language and format preferences that could make the difference between funding and rejection. Look at this one, he signed, pointing to a presentation that had secured significant funding for an educational technology startup. See how they structured their impact projections. They didn't just promise to help students, they demonstrated exactly how many students would benefit and provided specific metrics for measuring success. Linda studied the example carefully, taking notes about formatting and organizational structure. But she also noticed something else in Marcus's demeanor as he shared these materials. There was a wistfulness in his expression, a suggestion that he wished he could be more directly involved in the Foundation's work rather than simply observing from the periphery. "Have you ever presented to the board yourself?" Linda asked, her question gentle but direct. "You clearly understand their priorities and preferences better than most consultants would." Marcus's hands paused in their movement, and for a moment his expression became guarded. It was the first time since their initial meeting that Linda had seen him retreat into the distant politeness that had characterized their first interaction. "I've attended board meetings," he signed finally, his movements more careful than they had been earlier. "But I don't typically present. My role in the Foundation is more observational." There was something in the way he signed the word observational that suggested frustration with his limited involvement. Linda recognized the expression from countless interactions with Danny when he felt sidelined or underestimated because of his deafness. "That seems like a waste of talent," Linda signed, her response immediate and honest. "You understand both the business side and the accessibility challenges better than anyone else in that room probably does." Marcus looked up from his laptop with surprise, as if the idea that his perspective might be valuable had never occurred to him. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken recognition of shared experiences and mutual understanding. "The foundation was my great-grandfather's creation," Marcus explained, his signing more fluid as he relaxed into the conversation. "3 generations of Ashfords have guided its mission and strategy, but they've always seen my deafness as something to accommodate rather than something that brings unique insight to our work." Linda felt a familiar anger rise in her chest, the same protective instinct she experienced whenever she witnessed Danny being underestimated or dismissed. The idea that Marcus's family couldn't see the value his perspective brought to accessibility work was both frustrating and sadly predictable. What if that changed, she signed, an idea beginning to form in her mind. What if your involvement in this presentation demonstrated that deaf perspectives aren't just valuable for accessibility consulting, but essential for foundation work in general? Marcus stared at her with growing interest, clearly intrigued by whatever she was suggesting. "What if we structure the presentation as a collaboration?" she explained, her hands moving quickly between signing and gesturing toward the screen. "You provide the foundation expertise and insider knowledge. I provide the consulting framework and implementation strategy. We demonstrate that the most effective accessibility work happens when deaf individuals are partners in creating solutions, not just beneficiaries of them." The proposal was bold and potentially risky. Linda was essentially suggesting that Marcus challenge his family's assumptions about his capabilities and his role in their philanthropic work. But she had seen enough of his intelligence and business acumen to know that he could handle any presentation the foundation might require. Marcus was quiet for several long moments, his expression cycling through surprise, consideration, and what looked like growing excitement. When he finally responded, his signing carried an energy that hadn't been there earlier in the evening. "That could work," he signed, his movements quick with enthusiasm. "And it would address something the foundation has been struggling with for years. We've funded dozens of accessibility projects, but we've never had meaningful input from disabled community members about whether our priorities and strategies actually make sense." Linda felt a thrill of recognition that this collaboration could be even more significant than she had initially imagined. They weren't just preparing a presentation about her consulting firm. They were proposing a fundamental shift in how the Ashford Foundation approached disability advocacy and inclusion. The next 2 hours flew by as they restructured the entire presentation around their collaborative approach. Marcus's knowledge of foundation priorities and procedures combined seamlessly with Linda's practical experience and business strategy. What emerged was something neither of them could have created alone. A comprehensive proposal that addressed both immediate consulting needs and long-term strategic partnerships. By 9:30, they had created a presentation outline that was significantly more ambitious and potentially more impactful than anything Linda had originally envisioned. The consulting firm remained the central focus, but it was now positioned as the first initiative in a broader foundation commitment to disability-led advocacy and social change. As they packed up their materials and prepared to leave the now empty cafe, Linda found herself looking at Marcus with new appreciation for both his business skills and his willingness to take risks for something he believed in. "This is either going to be brilliant or it's going to get us both in trouble with your family," Linda signed with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Marcus grinned, his expression carrying a mischievous confidence that Linda hadn't seen from him before. "Sometimes the best ideas are the ones that make people uncomfortable," he signed back. "Besides, what's the point of having family money if you can't use it to make the world a little bit better?" As they walked out into the cool evening air, Linda realized that tomorrow's presentation had become about much more than securing funding for her consulting firm. It had become a statement about the value of deaf perspectives, the importance of authentic collaboration, and the possibility of transforming institutional approaches to accessibility and inclusion. The stakes had never been higher, but Linda had never felt more ready to meet them. Linda's story reminds us that extraordinary moments often emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. A simple morning shift at a cafe became the catalyst for connections that transcended social barriers and transformed multiple lives. Her intuitive decision to communicate in sign language with Marcus created ripples that extended far beyond a single breakfast service, challenging assumptions about disability, privilege, and the invisible walls that separate different communities. The power of authentic human connection proved stronger than wealth, status, or societal expectations. When Linda saw Marcus not as a wealthy customer to be served, but as a whole person deserving genuine communication, she unlocked possibilities neither of them had imagined. Their collaboration demonstrated that meaningful change happens when those who understand challenges firsthand are empowered to create solutions, rather than simply being recipients of others' charity. This encounter between a hard-working waitress and a billionaire's son illustrates a profound truth about our interconnected world. True accessibility isn't just about ramps and sign language interpreters. It's about recognizing the full humanity and potential in every person we meet, regardless of the differences that might initially seem to divide us. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply treating someone with the dignity and respect they deserve. Linda and Marcus proved that when we break down barriers through understanding and genuine partnership, we don't just help individuals succeed. We create pathways for entire communities to thrive, transforming not only personal dreams but institutional approaches to inclusion and social change.